Green things grow when three conditions are met: warmth, light, and water. Remove any one of these and growth stops. This is why winter kills gardens across the Northern Territories, why settlers who could grow abundant vegetables in July faced months of nothing but preserved food and dried goods, and the slow creep of nutritional deficiency that came with a diet lacking anything fresh. The cold takes the warmth. The short days reduce the light. The frozen ground locks away the water. Winter wins and gardens die, and people eat what they stored and hope it lasts until spring. But here's what most settlers did not understand. The cold that kills gardens is surface cold. The earth itself, below the frost line, maintains a steady temperature year-round, somewhere between 50 and 55 degrees, regardless of whether the air above is 90 in summer or 30 below in winter. This is not magic. This is physics. The mass of the earth absorbs heat slowly and releases it slowly, buffering against the wild swings that happen in the thin layer of air where humans live. 4 feet down, 5 feet down, 6 feet down, the temperature barely changes from January to July. A garden built below the surface, protected from the killing cold of winter air, warmed by the steady temperature of the deep earth, lit by sunlight admitted through glass, such a garden could grow food year-round. Not summer crops, not tomatoes and peppers that need sustained heat, but the hardy greens that thrive in cool conditions, the lettuces and spinaches and kales that actually prefer temperatures in the 50s over the blazing heat of August. A sunken greenhouse could produce fresh vegetables in the dead of winter when everyone else was eating pickled cabbage and dried beans and wondering why their gums were bleeding and their joints were aching. Helena Varga knew this because her grandmother had known it. In Hungary, in the mountains where the winters were long and the growing season was short, her family had built pit greenhouses for generations. They called them földház, earth houses, and they produced vegetables from October to April, while the snow piled deep and the cold pressed against the glass, and the green things inside ignored the winter entirely. Helena had helped her grandmother tend the földház as a child. She had learned which crops grew best in the cool, filtered light, which needed more water and which needed less, how to regulate temperature by opening and closing vents, how to use barrels of water as thermal mass that stored the day's heat and released it slowly through the night. She had learned that winter gardening was not a dream, but a technique, not hope, but engineering. When she came to Nebraska in 1882 with her husband Janos and their son Andres, she came with seeds and knowledge and the intention of building what her grandmother had built. But there was no time. The homestead needed a house. The fields needed breaking. The livestock needed fencing. Janos worked from dawn to dark, and Helena worked beside him, and the földház remained a plan that never became a project. Janos died in the winter of 1886, kicked by a horse that spooked at a wolf, dead before he hit the frozen ground. Helena buried him on the hill behind the house and spent 3 days wondering if she should give up, sell the homestead, take Andras back east, where a widow might find work that did not require the strength of a man. 3 days of wondering, and then she stopped wondering and started digging. The földház would not bring Janos back. Nothing would bring Janos back. But it would keep her and Andras alive, would provide food when stores ran out, would give her something to build that had nothing to do with grief and everything to do with survival. She could not control death, but she could control whether green things grew in January. She chose a south-facing slope behind the house, protected from the north wind by the bulk of the hill itself. She began digging in the spring of 1887, when the ground thawed enough to accept a shovel. 6 feet deep, 20 feet long, 8 feet wide, the pit taking shape shovel by shovel over months of labor that her neighbors watched with increasing concern. Ida Comstock was the first to comment publicly. She was the wife of Howard Comstock, who owned more land than anyone else in the county and who employed most of the men who did not own their own farms. Ida considered herself the social arbiter of the settlement, the enforcer of standards, the voice that announced what was proper and what was not. "The Hungarian woman is digging a pit behind her house," Ida announced at the church social in June of 1887. "A pit 6 feet deep. She says she intends to grow vegetables in it through the winter, underground like some kind of mole person. The woman has clearly been affected by her husband's death. Someone should speak to her before she hurts herself or the boy." The gossip spread the way gossip always spreads, distorted slightly with each retelling until the story became more colorful than the reality. The Hungarian widow was digging a hole to live in. The Hungarian widow was building a cave because she had lost her mind. The Hungarian widow was planting her garden underground because she did not understand that plants need sunlight. Each version was wrong, and each version was believed, and Helena heard all of them and continued digging. By autumn of 1887, the pit was complete. Helena and Andras lined the walls with stones gathered from the fields, fitted together without mortar, providing drainage and preventing the earth from crumbling inward. They built the north wall higher than the south wall, creating an angle that would catch the winter sun. They framed the south-facing roof with timber and covered it with glass panes that Helena had purchased with money she could not afford to spend. Glass being expensive and the widow being poor, but the glass being essential and the widow knowing exactly what she was building. The design was simple once you understood the physics. The pit was below the frost line, so the walls maintained a steady 55 degrees regardless of the air temperature. The glass roof faced south, catching the winter sun when it hung low on the horizon, admitting light and heat into the growing space. The north wall was earth and stone, absorbing heat during the day and releasing it at night. The water barrels along the north side added thermal mass, stabilizing the temperature against sudden swings. The combination created a space that stayed above freezing even when the air outside dropped to 20 below. Helena planted the first seeds in September of 1887. Lettuce and spinach and kale, crops that thrived in cool temperatures, that actually bolted and turned bitter in summer heat, but grew sweet and tender in the 50s and 60s. She planted carrots and beets, root crops that could be harvested through the winter as needed. She planted herbs that would provide flavor and nutrition when the snow was deep and the nearest store was impossible to reach. The winter of 1887 to 88 was the test. By November, snow covered the ground and the air temperature dropped below zero. The surface gardens were dead, frozen solid, nothing but stubble and mud waiting for spring. But inside the Feldhaus, the temperature held at 52 degrees, the lettuce grew thick and green, and Helena harvested fresh salad in December, while her neighbors ate preserved vegetables from their root cellars. She did not advertise her success. She did not invite the neighbors to see what she had built. She simply harvested vegetables and fed her family and let the winter pass, knowing that sooner or later someone would notice and the questions would come. The questions came in January of 1888, when Margaret Dawson appeared at Helena's door, looking frightened and desperate. Margaret was a quiet woman, wife of a struggling farmer, mother of 4 children under the age of 8. She had never been unkind to Helena, had simply ignored her the way most of the settlement ignored the foreign widow with her strange accent and her stranger projects. "Mrs. Varga," Margaret said, and her voice was trembling. My children's gums are bleeding, their joints ache. Tommy lost a tooth this morning, and he is only 6. I do not know what is wrong with them, but I am afraid they are dying." Helena knew immediately what was wrong. Scurvy, the disease of sailors and settlers, of anyone who went too long without fresh vegetables, without the vitamins that the body needed but could not produce. Her grandmother had taught her to recognize it, had taught her that the foldhas was not a luxury, but a necessity, that families who ate nothing but preserved food through long winters sometimes died of a disease that fresh greens could cure. "Come with me," Helena said. She led Margaret around the house to the hillside where the foldha's door was set into the slope, opened the door, and gestured for Margaret to enter. Margaret descended the steps into the sunken space and stopped, her mouth falling open, her eyes unable to process what she was seeing. Green, everywhere green, lettuce in rows, spinach in clusters, kale reaching toward the glass roof that admitted winter sunlight into this impossible space, carrots with their feathery tops visible above the soil, beets with their red-veined leaves, herbs growing thick and fragrant along the edges. A garden in January, underground, while snow covered everything outside. "How?" Margaret whispered. "How is this possible?" "The earth is warm," Helena said. "The glass lets in light. The plants grow. It is not magic. It is engineering." She harvested a basket of greens for Margaret, lettuce and spinach and kale, enough to feed 4 children for a week. She explained that they needed to eat the greens raw or lightly cooked, that cooking too long destroyed the vitamins, that the fresh vegetables would cure what preserved vegetables could not. She sent Margaret home with food and knowledge and instructions to return when the basket was empty. The children recovered. Within a week, the bleeding gums had stopped. Within 2 weeks, the joint pain had eased. Within a month, all 4 were healthy again, saved by a basket of lettuce that had grown in a hole in the ground while the settlement ate pickled cabbage and wondered why people were getting sick. Margaret told others. She could not help it. Her children had been dying, and the Hungarian widow had saved them, and the story was too extraordinary to keep secret. She told the women at church, who told their husbands, who told their neighbors, and within days everyone in the settlement knew that the crazy foreign woman with her underground pit was growing vegetables in January. The reactions varied. Some dismissed it as exaggeration, as the kind of story that grew in the telling until it bore no relationship to reality. Some were curious, wanting to see for themselves whether such a thing was possible. And some, like Ida Comstock, were offended, as if Helena's success was a personal insult to everyone who had laughed at her project. "It is impossible," Ida declared at the general store. "Plants cannot grow underground in winter. The woman has preserved vegetables stored somewhere and is claiming she grew them fresh. She is lying to make herself seem clever, to make the rest of us seem foolish. I refuse to believe it without seeing it myself." So, Helena invited her to see. The visit happened on a February afternoon, cold enough that breath condensed in the air and fingers ached within minutes of leaving pockets. Ida arrived with 3 other women, witnesses to whatever truth or fraud they were about to uncover. They walked around the house to the hillside door, and Helena opened it and led them down into the earth. Ida said nothing, She walked the rows of growing vegetables, touched the leaves of lettuce that was undeniably alive and undeniably growing, ran her fingers through soil that was unfrozen while the surface of the ground was locked in ice. She examined the glass roof, the water barrels, the stone walls that radiated the steady warmth of deep earth. She saw everything and understood nothing, or understood everything and refused to accept it. "This is not natural," Ida finally said. "Growing food underground, out of season, against the will of God who ordained that winter should be a time of rest. This is not farming. This is something else." Helena looked at her. She thought about arguing, about explaining the physics, about describing the generations of Hungarian farmers who had built Földházak long before Ida Comstock was born. But arguing with people who had decided to disbelieve required energy that Helena did not have and would not waste. "It is food," Helena said simply. "Fresh food in winter. My son eats it. Margaret Dawson's children eat it and no longer have bleeding gums. You can call it whatever you want. I call it survival." Ida left without another word. She did not thank Helena for the demonstration. She did not apologize for the months of gossip and mockery. She simply left, and Helena went back to tending her vegetables, and the winter continued toward spring. The scurvy spread through the settlement in late February. It spread because the winter had been long, and the stored vegetables had run low, and too many families had been eating nothing but salt pork and dried beans since Christmas. It spread because the body cannot store vitamin C, because deficiency builds slowly over weeks and months, because by the time symptoms appear, the damage is already serious. 8 families showed symptoms by the end of February, 12 by mid-March. The bleeding gums, the loose teeth, the aching joints, the fatigue that made every task feel impossible. The settlement had no doctor. The nearest town with medical care was 3 days away in good weather, impossible in the mud and snow of late winter. People were sick and getting sicker, and the only treatment was the fresh vegetables that no one had because winter had killed every garden except the one that grew underground. Helena did not wait to be asked. She harvested everything she could spare, loaded baskets with greens that she and Andras carried to families that had never spoken to her except to gossip. She explained what to eat and how to eat it, repeated the instructions that she had given Margaret Dawson, watched the disbelief in people's eyes give way to desperate hope as they accepted food from the foreign widow they had mocked. The greens worked. They worked the way they had worked for Margaret's children, the way they had worked for centuries whenever fresh vegetables met vitamin deficiency. Within weeks, the scurvy retreated, the bleeding stopped, the teeth tightened in their sockets, the joints stopped aching. 23 people recovered from a disease that could have killed them, recovered because of lettuce and spinach and kale that had grown underground, while everyone said it was impossible. The settlement changed after that winter, not completely, not dramatically, but in small ways that accumulated over time. Families that had mocked Helena's project began asking questions about how it worked. Men who had called her pit a molehole started digging pits of their own, following instructions that Helena provided without charge, without resentment, without any comment on the mockery that had preceded the curiosity. Ida Comstock never apologized. She never acknowledged that she had been wrong, never admitted that the Hungarian widow's foreign knowledge had saved lives that American practices would have lost. She simply stopped talking about Helena entirely, which was its own kind of acknowledgement, a silence that said more than words. By the winter of 1889, 5 families in the settlement had sunken greenhouses producing vegetables through the cold months. By 1890, the number had doubled. The technique spread through the county, then through the territory, carried by word of mouth from farmers who had watched their families sicken and recover, who understood that fresh food in winter was not a luxury, but a necessity. Helena Varga lived on her homestead for another 32 years, passing in the summer of 1919 at the age of 68. Andras inherited the farm and expanded it, building 3 more sunken greenhouses and supplying winter vegetables to families across 2 counties. He married a woman who learned the techniques and taught them to their children, and the knowledge that Helena's grandmother had passed down continued passing down, generation after generation. The original foldhas still stands, maintained now by the family that bought the farm when Andras's grandson moved to Omaha. The glass has been replaced twice, and the water barrels are plastic now instead of oak, but the stone walls are the same stones that Helena and Andras fitted together in 1887, still holding back the earth, still keeping the temperature steady. Visitors come sometimes, people interested in sustainable agriculture or season extension or the history of immigrant farming. They descend the same steps that Helena descended every winter day, walk the same rows where she grew lettuce and spinach and kale, stand in the same underground space that stayed green while snow buried everything above. There is no plaque explaining what happened in the winter of 1888. No marker commemorating the 23 people who recovered from scurvy because of vegetables grown in a hole in the ground. Helena never wanted monuments. She wanted food. She wanted her son to eat fresh greens in January. She wanted to build what her grandmother had built, and she built it, and it worked, and that was enough. The glass still catches the winter sun. The earth still provides its steady warmth. And every January, when the snow lies deep and the air is bitter and the surface world seems dead, green things grow in that pit on the hillside, exactly as they have grown for over a century, 52 degrees. That is the temperature of survival. That is the warmth that the earth provides to anyone willing to dig deep enough to find it.